Connecting people and sharing experiences. This is the Retirement Years Podcast. Your hosts are Mary Ellen French and Dave Wing.
Hi there, I'm Mary Ellen.
And I'm Dave, and today we have a very unique and interesting topic for the podcast, I would say, to say the least.
Yes.
It all came out of something you said, Mary Ellen, back in episode 8 this very season, when we were practicing our conversation starters to achieve big talk in 2024. And I'd asked you which TV character you would like to be. And you waffled a bit because you had two, but then so did I. You would either be Samantha on Bewitched or the oldest Halliwell sister on Charmed. And both of them had a link, and that's that both are witches.
Yeah.
And then a listener who is a witch reached out and asked if we would be interested in having her on the show to talk about her witch school.
And I just think that's amazing. I mean, I chose two witches as the TV characters I'd like to be because I think ultimately it's about power, right? Like I'd like to have that. I would only use it for good, of course, but it would be fun to have that power, right? So, and so the listener who reached out to us happened to be somebody I knew, and I hadn't even sort of made the connection that she would have been a great, and is going to be, as you'll hear, a great guest for our podcast. So that was nice, and that's not the first time that, of course, that a listener has reached out and made a suggestion about a podcast topic. So we're very appreciative of not only her suggestion, but also of her being a guest.
And I think that point will come back around next episode when we talk about the season that was.
Yeah.
About the impact that listeners can have on our ideas. And I like that our web is growing, our connection with people and ideas. And our minds are bringing in a lot of new things in retirement. And I would say that if you were a witch and you did achieve some power, that power is better lying with you than with me. Before we dive into the interview with Kiki, we'll talk a bit about those stereotypes about witches. And I don't know where you've been if you haven't heard of any of them. Like, of course, they're often cast as evil, not always, but often. Of course, they're going to be dressed in black with a big black hat. Sometimes their skin is green. That's a hard one to explain. Riding around on a broom. Most of this, of course, comes from Hollywood and the media and some books, I suppose. But today, we do know that these stereotypes are simply not true.
No.
The Women's Center of Calgary put out an article last year entitled Witchcraft and Womanhood. And they stated that there were calculated campaigns against women that led to many stereotypes. And that does make perfect sense because many of those would have been created by men or those ill-informed, to say the least.
Yeah.
But as mentioned, we've come a long way. In a story in USA Today in 2021 entitled, "We're in the Middle of a Witch Moment. Hip Witchcraft is on the Rise in the US."
Yeah.
I love the quote from that article. "No longer considered wicked, witches are hip."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I know in a off-camera conversation with Kiki, she said that many of the people who come to witch school are actually in their like 20s and 30s. Like it is quite hip among that younger generation. And yet it's what they're looking for is sort of leadership and guidance from those of us who are of a certain age and have been on this earth for many more spins of it and would be considered crones, right?
Right.
So yeah, we talked earlier in this season, the episode that we did on the health and wellness trends. And one of those trends in the Toronto Star article was that pro-aging is the new anti-aging. And, that's all part of that movement to battle ageism in marketing. And there was another Toronto Star article on 5 women over 50, and they were featured as women of power from a variety of different vocations and backgrounds and influence. And they talked about how they have been impacted despite their power, they have been impacted both by ageism and sexism. And I thought that was very interesting. So we'll put up a link for listeners on our website.
Well, and this is completely off. Well, no, I guess it's not off topic completely, but if you want to sort of see an example of sometimes people having an issue with women of power,
Mm-hmm.
how a young lady, you may have heard of her, Taylor Swift, has been treated by some during the attention she garnered while attending football games and supporting someone that it would appear she is in a relationship with. That to me is a pretty good lesson, and one that I hope that young women take as good for her. Let's go for more. That's what I hope comes out of that.
Yeah.
But I'll get down. My soapbox is too high to record on. But let's get to our interview, shall we?
Yes.
Our interview with Kiki. She is the founder of Witch School Canada, and her hope is this. This comes from her website. She would like to see that Witch School will serve as the spiritual backbone of activism and personal transformation for the students. So what a great goal
Yes.
for that insight and empowerment for anyone who would like to take the course. We were interested to learn more about the school that Kiki founded after she took an early semi-retirement to pursue this passion. So there's the link to what we're talking about, something that she decided to do after and partially during a regular job, you might say. We would like to make listeners aware of that there is a small amount of content that is somewhat explicit in Kiki's comments. But having said that, it is in no way inappropriate or offensive, but the content is adult oriented.
Yeah.
So with that said, here is our conversation with Kiki regarding witches and Witch School.
Welcome, Kiki, to the Retirement Years podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So today we're here to talk about witches, and I'm so excited that you reached out to offer to be a guest on the podcast because I know you, and it hadn't occurred to me to invite you, and I apologize for that, but I'm really excited that you're here today.
It's a delight.
So tell our listeners, what are some of the common mythologies around witches or witchcraft that you hear from people who don't really know what it's all about in 2024?
Well, I absolutely don't fly on a broomstick.
Okay.
And my skin is not green.
Nope.
And I do not tweet my nose and things magically appear.
That's unfortunate.
Let's start there. I have been a witch my whole life, which means to me that I, first of all, believe in deep intuition. And intuition is one of those things that we think we understand what it is. But in witch school and being a witch, we try and master the techniques around developing and extending our own intuition.
So, Kiki, I would count myself among those who would know very little on the topic, which is why I was quite excited about having the chance to talk to you today, because I'm finding as I get older, I get more curious and want to find out more things, probably because I have more time. So for the benefit of myself and anyone else who would be in the same boat, could you tell us more about who or what a witch is or is not in 2024? Because we've all seen the stereotypes and the myths, but I would be interested in hearing what you have to say on that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just tell you a little bit about me personally, because your listeners can't see me, but I'm as normal looking as they come. I'm 55. I'll be 56 next month. I was born in the 60s. I'm a university professor. I teach at Columbia University and at Carleton. And I don't teach in the religious studies department. I actually teach in the MBA program and in journalism. I have a long corporate career in marketing and PR, and I kind of put that aside and pseudo-retired to start witch school. And I have a life coaching practice. I help people go through really hard changes in their life, divorces, job changes, really the basics. And so I'm talking to your listeners from that point of view. It's like I'm middle life and retired, and I have created these amazing places in my life where I feel incredibly fulfilled, and yet I don't consider myself working full time anymore. I'm really living out my passion and who I am. And yeah, I make an income at it. I'm delighted to do that. I'm not afraid of making an income at it. It's really what I'm good at. And people want that resource exchange. So that's sort of the, kind of the business side of things. A witch is someone that consciously and unconsciously wields power for magic, change, transformation. I'm 7th generation witch. What does that mean? So my colonizer family came from Ireland. They arrived on the shores of Turtle Island, Canada, and they made the best of it. But 7th generation witch means that I come from a long line of healers. And yeah, probably in about 1920, they started self-identifying as nurses, midwives, helping people die. They also ended up being chemical engineers and farmers and computer developers. But for the most part, they believed in nature as their number one spiritual source. And that was in contradiction to what I now call churchianity. So they came from Ireland, at least my matrilineal line, my mother's, my grandmother's, my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmothers were all neo-pagans. They didn't follow a biblical dogma as the number one source for direction. They willingly or unwillingly followed a church. And in many ways, that church was power and patriarchal led and told them what to think and what to do. And really started to manage and manipulate people's thinkings away from nature and into the church, into a power structure, into a biblical mythology that asked them to say farewell to their old mythologies. So from an anthropological point of view, I want to retrieve that belief system. Before Christianity essentially took over their money, their farms, and their minds. And so I'm revisiting what my foremothers were doing, which is they were the wise women in the village. How many of us have great-great-grandmothers, grandfathers that were the wise people in the forests or the villages that could add sugar to a plant and the plant would suddenly stop dying and thrive, would heal a child with opening a window and letting fresh air in and changing the sheets, cook a good soup that would give the nutrients that the person who had the flu, who might have died without it. Those are the kinds of practical witch skills that I believe in. I bet you do too. And yet when we had sort of power structures in the 14th, 16th century that really wanted to push out natural healing or natural ways and wanted to control the wild, they also often wanted to control what they didn't understand. And in many ways, that was our bodies.
Right.
So you want a story about the broomstick?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So if you have young kids around, like your grandkids around, maybe they need to be distracted, put them on the iPad right now with some headphones on, because here it goes.
Okay.
So once upon a time, there was a boy named Peter. And Peter in the 16th century was fascinated by the widow that lived in the woods. She had lost her husband. She happened to also be very beautiful. And she wore black. And he would creep up in the forest and look in her windows. And there she was, sweeping every day. And probably grieving or mourning the loss of her partner, but also just the effort that it takes to manage a home by herself and not wanting to be around other people and not wanting to remarry right away. And maybe she was childless. I don't know. Peter didn't explain that part of the story. But Peter would look in the window and he would watch her sweep. Sweep, she would sweep. Sweep, she would sweep. And one day he looked in the window and he was quite enamored with her. And she lifted her head up and cackled loudly, laughing and sweeping quickly and running across the room. Well, when he looked closer in the window, the broom was between her legs. And that broom was between her legs because it gave her pleasure. And that pleasure was vilified. He suddenly felt something in his body tweak and couldn't explain it. And so ran to the village square, dropped his soapbox, and told everyone that the evil witch in the forest had cast a spell on him and she should be tried and drowned. And so that broom was, in fact, the first dildo. So why are witches depicted like flying through the sky out of ecstasy? Probably that story, like a broken telephone, got told again and again and again. But the basis of that story is those things that are mysterious, like a true physical attraction to another where you feel like you can't control it, is a mystery. It's part of acknowledging the wild. And when we can't control the wild, then we vilify it and do our best to control it. And that is how witches have been hunted for hundreds and hundreds of years.
I had no idea. I had no idea that was the basis for.
Kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Oh, it makes total sense to me as a woman. And I'm wondering what other aspects. Well, I shouldn't say that. I am discovering as I age and certain things about my body change, especially in the area of my face. I come to understand why depictions of older witches have things like warts and chin hairs, because I understand as I age that this is happening to me.
Yeah. And
right?
They get amplified and then vilified.
They do. Yeah. Because they don't meet up with what we think of as beauty. Thank you to the marketers. Okay. So tell me, Kiki, what is Witch School and sort of what led you to create it?
Yeah. What led me to create Witch School actually happened about 7 years ago, watching a Trump campaign rally. And I know you may have some, you may have all kinds of political beliefs, folks listening, but I want to just tell you about one part of that rally that really affected me, is that the crowd, this is just when Hillary Clinton was vying for Democratic leadership, and the campaign itself for the Republicans was choosing their leadership. And it happened that a very cunning leader, Donald Trump, navigated this part brilliantly. And so by vilifying Hillary Clinton, and I'm not a huge Hillary Clinton fan, but by vilifying her without proper trial or evidence at the time, he incited the crowd to yell together, lock her up, lock her up. So already putting her in prison. And I was amazed how quickly the crowd had that on the tip of their tongue. It's almost like, so that was just 200 years ago where we were already trying mysterious people, because I think Hillary remains mysterious, right? She stood by her husband during an incredible ordeal. And for even those feminists among us, we can't even understand how what kind of strength she might have had in order to sustain that. But she did. And it's mysterious that she stayed put and she used the opportunity to elevate her own political career. It's mysterious. And so because it's mysterious, it was very easy to lock her up from a mob. And when that happened, I knew I had to do something. Partly because I believe that the left needs a spiritual support center. And it's not always, it can sometimes be a church. I'm a solid Unitarian Universalist. I believe that bricks and mortar of a church can be amazing, but there are a lot of people that are disenfranchised by the dogma of a church, and they believe in nature. And nature is where they feel like they're most at home, and they're in their own church. And so witches have always gone to nature for their temple. So witch school became something that I wanted to offer with the help and support of my elders. And we started developing the curriculum. And the curriculum is very simple. It's 11 months. It starts with anthropology and history of witches. Where did this all start? We go back to Neolithic, Paleolithic times. We look at the ancient archaeology, the nomadic travels from all points of the earth. We look at indigenous traditions and what's the same. And I'll tell you, earth, air, fire, water is universal. And the directions are universal. That is not specific to indigenous people in one part of the world and not the other. They're universal. Some of the ways that there's an interdependency between the web of life, universal. So the first 6 classes of witch school really unpack what is the same between indigenous traditions from around the world and before what we had was fixed religions. So how did we make sense of the stars and the moon and the tides and animal behavior, human psychology? How did we make sense of every 21 days, this part of our population goes through this? And when these 2 body parts come together, we make a third body. Like, this is amazing, right? And so humans made sense of it in a very intelligent way. And so we look back on what was that and where were the mysticisms taken as normal. Your listeners might even know, like, the goddess of Willendorf, some of these archaeological statuettes. Some of those are now at Cornell University and the London Museum and all over the world to depict that we may in fact have had matriarchal, matrilineal collective societies. And that doesn't mean not with men or two-spirited. That means collectives, where we looked at life cycles as being the way that we make sense of the world. So the second semester of witch school is all about practical skills and tools. So for those listeners that love or are curious about tarot or astrology or numerology, runes, we do a lot of that. Learning, beginner level. We do divination and mediumship. We've all heard about that, but what is it? So we get to the beginning part of it. We do herbal magic. When you have a burn on your arm and you put aloe vera on, guess what? That is herbal magic. We take for granted that maybe even some of our normal pharmaceuticals are all coming from plants. We do some really wonderful programs like shape-shifting, which is almost like sacred theater, where we put on a mythology and reenact it. It's a lot of fun. Sacred circle dancing. What were the ancients doing when they danced around a fire? They weren't just going wild. Sometimes they were doing steps that put them into a meditation or a trance. All of this is to further develop one's intuition. And the intuition is so important, especially in today's society. We're just slammed with all kinds of stimuli all over the place that we can't hear our intuition anymore. And so that's the goal of the first semester and the second semester. We're remembering. The third semester of witch school, which is the final one, is all about leadership. What does leadership look like in a healthy way? How do we look at creative models, collaborative models for leadership? It could be leadership within ourselves, personal development, authenticity. Where do you want to see yourself? What do you want to do with this next chapter of your life? And so the third semester is a coaching model, and you set an intention. We cast it like a spell, and we spell cast that intention for leadership so that you can be witnessed. We'll hold accountable. We assign a crone to you, so you have a mentor. And then every month we check in about your spell and see how far you've come or where you've slipped backwards. And we coach you forward so that you have that accomplishment after a year. And often our students join the alumni groups like the Badass Babes Book Club, and they study a chapter every month from the book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves by Dr. Maria Pincola Estes. We have a husband and wife group. So they are couples that have taken witch school together and have made it part of their Sunday practice. It's helped them develop in their relationship and given them a shared spirituality in nature. And we have another group, Herbal Magic. They make tinctures in the fall, and so many other wonderful alumni groups. So the community is across North America. We have 300 alumni now, and we've been doing this since 2017. There are 3 reasons people enroll. 1, they want the structure. They love meeting once a week on Zoom, really easy. People from all over Canada and the US. And we have 13 students per class, a nice small group. And they really study. And it comes from within them. We ask everyone to learn about their own ancestral lineage. Mine is from Ireland, others is from elsewhere. But they spend time trying to understand what their neo-pagan roots were before power structures took over. And so that's Witch School.
Kiki, we'll talk a bit more about this before we wrap up, but a new session is starting fairly soon from when this will air. And as I say, we'll talk about that some more and how they can get more information, anyone listening that's interested, because there will be some for sure. You partially answered the question, but I still would like to confirm it a bit. Is there a place for men in witch school?
Oh, yes. I think that men's levels of intuition are so important in society. The stronger connection you have to your heart self and you're listening compassionately, the stronger the world can be. We need the whole team. Everyone show up, please. We need men and women, and we need the two-spirited too. So absolutely. We have mostly women, I'd say, but we have men enroll in witch school as well.
That's good to know. Because you're right, we do. We need everybody to be.
We need everyone's sense of compassion, creative collaboration. Yeah. And we have to acknowledge that there is wonderful strengths and weaknesses in all of us. In fact, we each hold the masculine and the feminine within ourselves. You know, it's that Dr. Carl Jung, you know,
yes,
he had some wonderful teachings about archetypes.
Yeah.
Our archetypes, and what archetypes do we keep in our minds? And my partner Ryan, he's studying masculine archetypes right now. The king, the warrior, the lover. What are these magicians within him? And when does he need them most? And so when we look at the women's archetypes, we look at the maiden, the mother, the queen, and the crone. But actually, we have them all within us, and we utilize them at different times in our life to do different things.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about pre-Christianity, right? And so I think, you know, based on what you said earlier about that, listeners may be surprised to hear that there's actually similarities or connections between witchcraft and pick an organized religion, Christianity, for example. Can you just explore that a little bit? And
Absolutely.
Where does Wiccan fit in, by the way? Does Wiccan fit in here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's start with Wicca or
Wicca. Yes. Okay.
So I am not Wiccan,
Right.
although it sounds a lot like witch. And I do not practice Wicca. Wicca is a designated religion. They have a seat on the UN as a official religion. That is a very specific teaching, and it was developed in the 16th century in England. And my program will borrow some from that when it makes sense. But for the most part, we in Witch School look back before what maybe most of your listeners are relating to is before Christianity. But lots of Christians also identify with witchcraft. And so there are, if you Google search out there, Christian witches, there are a lot of them that have written wonderful books, because in Christianity, we have amazing archetypes. Mary, Magdalene. I'll even go to Catholicism, which is how I grew up, learning about in school. I went to Catholic school, believe it or not, because my family wanted me to learn about all kinds of religions. I think that's so important. And so I learned about, get this, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Nobody ever talks about the Holy Spirit. Like, what were their roles? And who are they? What's that about? And I think that's where they borrowed from neo-pagan tradition, because even Christmas is borrowed from winter solstice. And winter solstice is a natural phenomenon on the earth. And so there's an opportunity to just borrow what's working out there, pagan belief, and apply it to a religion and make it their own.
I love that Kiki mentions mysterious several times in the interview. It reminded me that of a book that I've been reading called the Menopause Manifesto by Dr. Jen Gunter. And essentially what she talks about, Dr. Jen Gunter, in this book is that menopause and perimenopause are a mystery. Mm-hmm. And basically women's health is a mystery to most of the medical profession, because for hundreds and hundreds of years, women's health as being distinct from men's health has largely been ignored. And so anything that we don't understand, as Kiki said, is mysterious, and therefore we end up creating story around it. And it's not always in the best interests of women that those stories get created, because they don't tend to get created by women.
And often not created accurately.
No.
And to that point, in a 2020 article entitled, "Why Do Witches Ride Brooms? The History Behind the Legend." It was an article put out by history.com, and it speaks to the legend of the broomstick. But in describing some of the legends, the article does point out a weakness in the source of historical information.
Yeah.
The author notes it's impossible to know whether such stories, reported at the height of anxiety over witchcraft in Europe in the Middle Ages, reflected reality or not. Most of what we know about medieval witchcraft today comes from the records of religious inquisitors, mm-hmm. legal officials, and testimony from accused witches themselves, who, small footnote, often being tortured themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that article that you're referring to on history.com backs up the story that Kiki told about Peter and the broomstick, mm-hmm. and what Peter observed. So just in case anybody thought that Kiki might be making that up. Nope. I think it's interesting that in terms of language, and Kiki doesn't mention this, but this came up in some of the research that I was doing, those who practice witchcraft spell magic with a K on the end. And they do that to distinguish what they do from magic without a K that one might see performers doing on a stage. Right. So I thought that was interesting. So if you ever come across the word magic spelt with a K, you can be sure that is authentically speaking about what one does when one is practicing witchcraft.
Right. And you did hear Kiki say that there is a difference between Wicca and witchcraft.
Yes.
And I'm going to relate what I went back and found on the topic. And I am very conscious of the fact that I am not going to attempt to mansplain this in any way,
Nope.
just sharing because that piqued my interest too. Like I would have interchanged those terms.
Yeah.
This makes it somewhat easier for me to get my head around. All Wiccans are witches, but not all witches are Wiccans. I get that. Yeah. Wicca is a subset of witchcraft.
Yeah.
And according to Wicca Academy, Wicca is a contemporary nature-based pagan religion, while witchcraft is the practice of using personal energy and intention to bring about desired changes in the world. It can take many forms, including spells, rituals, and herbalism.
Yeah.
And again, I think many of us would have interchanged Wicca with witchcraft, but they are clearly different. And as Kiki said, she does not practice Wicca.
Yeah. Yeah. So Wiccan is a religion, and witchcraft is not. Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, this is one of the wonderful things about retirement, right? We get to learn new things. And that is one of the wonderful things about doing this podcast is that you and I are continually learning new things. And this was one of those episodes where we learned a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And just generally in retirement, I mean, one of the reasons we do the podcast is because we want to let people know about all the options that are out there in retirement. And retirement is a wonderful time to learn new things. You can have the time to maybe get acquainted with or reacquainted with nature. You can explore your spirituality because it often tends to deepen at this stage of life. And practicing witchcraft with others is, let's face it, that's another way to have community, which we've talked about on several episodes as being necessary for your well-being.
Yes. And on the note of being, remaining open-minded and curious, you and I, not, being just shy of 100 years old, we can remember a time when you either went to those encyclopedias and then took a stab at which one it might be under the topic you're looking for, or get off your butt and go to the library. We are carrying around, many of us, an incredibly powerful computer that has the world of information right there that, of course, you have to filter through and make sure you're going to authentic resources. But it's so, and during retirement, many of us have more of that time to do that. And anyone listening who's interested in learning about the anthropology and the practical skills of witchcraft, we would suggest that you check out www.witchschool.ca. The next 11-month online session starts quite soon after this airs, and it will start on February 26th.
Mm-hmm.
And as Kiki pointed out, anyone can register.
Yep, anyone. So thank you to Kiki for being on our podcast and for sharing really interesting information with our listeners. As I said, our mission on this podcast is to inspire and inform and occasionally entertain. And we hope that listeners found today's episode both informative and inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
So we would encourage listeners to check out our website and our social media pages. Please like, follow, and subscribe.
And as always, and we sincerely mean this, we do thank everyone for listening.
Yes.
We also love to hear from you and your suggestions for topics, as we pointed out earlier. We're in the planning stages for season 4 and considering potential topics and guests. So keep sending us ideas. And if it's something we can follow up on, we will, and we'll be sure to give you credit.
Yes.
So tune in next week when we recap season 3 and take a sneak peek at season 4. So until then, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mary Ellen. Stay well.
You've been listening to the Retirement Years Podcast. Original music by Theodora Draper. Web design by Gavin Hinton. Social media marketing and management provided by Madison Sloan. Find her at MSS Mad Media.